Thank you. Hi, everyone. Today we're mixing up the regular ICAT Playdate format and having a conversation. I'm happy to welcome Jake Gross, Director of CENI and Associate Professor in Engineering Education, David Knight, who is an Associate Dean? Special Assistant to the Dean of College of Engineering, and also a professor in engineering education, and James Newcomer, who has played a huge role in our advising in engineering education, and is pursuing a PhD in engineering education. Why not? And so we're going to get started with a conversation, but I was just explaining to them that these donuts are actually metaphorical donuts for the moment. They're not made of styrofoam, but they will be employed. Okay. All right, so I'll start with you, Jake. So we're all really familiar with CENI's work with youth, with community events, Hokie for a Day, as Phyllis just mentioned, Science Festival, ICAT Day, we know, and the Educator Liaison Network. Could you tell us a little bit more about the research component of CENI?
Sure, yeah, so one of the things that CENI does a lot is work with networks of people, and one of the reasons we do that is because when you first think about kind of education spaces, you often think a lot about individual kids, you know, in their classrooms learning things or interested in particular careers. You think about individual teachers or faculty, you know, in their classrooms. And when you really dig in more into education research, you realize just how massive a system influences any of those decisions or things that you think might be just individual. So for an individual kid and their career interests, it might be, you know, what their peers have to say, what social media or the broader kind of environment says, what their family says, and a community and a web of support that kind of either support them along their years towards pursuing college, or that might hinder them and constrain them. Similarly with teachers or faculty, you might think about an individual choice in a classroom. How do I teach this thing? It sounds really individual until you realize that there's colleagues who might walk by, and you might decide what you do in your classroom based on how your colleagues might perceive it, or how your principal or your department head might perceive it, and how they value or don't value the kind of creative, innovative work you do. And so one of the big moves for us in CENI is around this kind of organizational or partnership or network-based research, because these are the phenomenon that we care about, and this is how we have to look at anything we might care about, even individual career interest or career choice. It is massively influenced by a web of support or constraints and barriers that face folks. So one of the key areas for us is around educational partnerships and collaborative networks, really understanding how different groups come together to support or hinder outcomes in educational spaces and ecosystems. And so one good example of this is this project that I'm really excited you get to hear about today. CENI is a part of this project, but certainly is not the primary leader of the project. It's a place where we play a primary role, but we collaborate with a wide variety of folks across Virginia Tech and several other institutions. So I'm really excited for you to hear about this project today, because I think it's a great model of some of the kinds of research CENI really does.
Great, thank you so much. David, do you mind giving us a quick overview of the project? And I think Jake started us out a little bit on what motivated the project, but maybe a little bit more about the motivations and goals.
Sure, and thanks for the invitation. It's exciting to be here today. I'll start by giving you a little bit of context about the STEM program through NSF. So that's the Scholarship for STEM Students program. It's a really big program. Actually, the funding comes from the H-1B visa program. It's diverted back into this program at NSF. And what it is really a program aimed at financially supporting low-income students in STEM disciplines. It's across a range of STEM disciplines, all different shapes and sizes of institutions, and there are about 600 or so of these programs happening right now across the country. We had one of these in partnership with Virginia Western Community College, Northern Virginia Community College, and the College of Engineering at Virginia Tech, led by Bev Watford. Walter Lee was involved also. We were really trying to think about how can we support students from a community college through a four-year degree within engineering. And what the project tried to do was really bring together the four-year partners with our community college partners from the get-go. So what typically happens is when a student starts in a community college, there's this handoff that occurs, and then hopefully the student is able to transition to the new institution. We believe that the four-year institution really needs to be a partner throughout the whole process and not just at that point of handoff. And so that really got our team thinking about how can we connect better with other individuals at other institutions, really putting the student at the center of the system. So if you see this figure in the top right, this is kind of our motivation for the whole thing. And Jake was talking about this kind of web of influences on individuals. And you can imagine that a student has to navigate a whole bunch of things to be successful, to successfully earn a degree. There are lots of different offices you have to go through. You have to go to financial aid, you have student support, you have different curricular units, and it becomes really, really complex when you have to think across multiple institutions. And so what NSF did a few years ago is instead of asking every single STEM program to conduct its own research, they decided we're going to focus our investments on research hubs. And what we decided to do as a team was propose a research hub that focuses on this organizational issue. So how can we understand how these programs work? How can we help other STEM programs think about building their partnerships in a smart and efficient way from the very beginning? If we think about what we did on our STEM here, we probably would have saved a whole year or two if we had really stepped back and thought really carefully and intentionally about our partnerships. And so we took that lesson and we really tried to build that into what our approach is as a team for this research hub. That's an overview of kind of what the motivation was. The way that we're doing it is we're bringing together teams that have STEM programs currently. So we've got a partnership network of 22 different colleges and universities who are currently working on STEM programs. And we bring them together to define a locally relevant problem related to partnerships so that they can get something going on their own campus. But then we as a leadership team try to do some cross-cutting research across all of those programs so that we can say something back to the community to really help enhance how we think about partnerships that support low-income students and how we can, I guess, better spark these partnerships from the very beginning when a program is trying to get something going through NSF.
Great, thank you. So this sounds like a very, very complex project. I'm sure the proposal writing process was intense and getting all of these people together, and I'm sure support letters, et cetera. And now that you have the award and are actually working across these collaborations, could you talk a little bit about the challenges and the rewards, and perhaps any tips on interdisciplinarity? And we could even call it cross-functionality too, because you're working across sectors, you're definitely working across ranks. And yeah, so we all know it's very complex and hard, but if you wanted to point out a few things that have really been salient and some tips, that would be great.
Sure. I think approaching this with a high degree of humility is really important. I think we understand our context really, really well. But what works here at Virginia Tech or works in a large research university does not translate to a community college context. So a perfect example of this is we were designing this student support framework that really relied on building cohorts of students. And so we talked about, when students start at a community college, we can bring the students all together and have regular meetings, and they can kind of stay together as they move through the program. And our community college partners are like, well, that's great, but the students don't start at the same time in our context. It was a completely fundamental misunderstanding of the context. And I think tip number one is just sitting down and having conversations with partners, what is your educational environment like before you start jumping right into solution mode. It sounds simple, and you would think that we would have gone through this, but we rushed into trying to create the programming without really understanding the context. I think the other thing too is in our partner network, we have people who are working directly with low-income students all the time, every day. That is their entire job. They really understand the system and what those students' needs are much better than other members of our team. And so really tapping into the expertise of different people, regardless of what organization they're working in, is something really important. I think recognizing some of the knowledge of your experts on your own campus. So we've really tapped into our advisors. They have probably the best pulse of on students' day-to-day lives than anybody. And so recognizing kind of where people sit in the organization and the expertise they can bring to think about the problem has been something that's been really important to us.
That's a great segue and an opportunity for me to once again plug the educational liaisons of CINE, because a lot of that same philosophy is behind why we formed this network and why we think it's valuable and successful is there are people who are on the ground and they know that context much better than we do, and we're really good at things too, but if there's a way that people on the ground can come here and guide us and have that humility, we have that humility and listen, then we're much more likely to be successful. So I'm excited to transition to James Newcomer to talk about boundary objects, and one of the things that we talk about with the educator liaisons is that they're boundary spanners. And so I would really like for you to talk about boundary objects and get to that very gnarly topic of curricular complexity.
So first, I think it's important to talk about boundaries. We've heard about the value, the benefit of bringing together people with different domains of expertise, but kind of as a corollary to the existence of different domains of expertise, there are borders or boundaries between those different domains of expertise. And if, I'm an expert in topic A and you're an expert in topic B, and I try to come into your topic without understanding what's going on, I don't speak the language, I don't know the terrain, I can't find the bathroom, I don't understand what's happening there without some kind of a Rosetta Stone to help me figure out what is it that you understand in your context that is going to be helpful for me, and what is it that I understand in my context is going to be helpful to you, and to translate those things between each other. And so boundary objects are useful for that because they are a way of putting together knowledge that is beneficial for all members of a partnership. So it helps in communicating across boundaries to different people, but it's also important to understand that in a lot of partnerships, people who are coming to the table as partners are not everyone who's involved in the partnership. Very often, the people who are at the table are representatives of a larger group. So anytime decisions are made or compromises are made between different groups in a partnership, you usually have to go back and sell some of the compromises that you made to the people in your domain. And so a boundary object should be able to help you with that as well. So boundary objects can be kind of abstract in a way. They could be literal objects, they could be metaphors. There's a lot of different things that they could be but their primary goal is to help you translate different ideas between people from different domains. And so curricular complexity was a concept that actually produces a real object, a curricular complexity map that we can use to facilitate these conversations between different groups.
Great. I'm glad that you brought that word metaphor back in, because I don't want to forget about the donuts. And we're going to round this out with an example of boundary objects, but I just want y'all to be thinking about the donuts as metaphors, or maybe if you personified your role in this project, which donut would be very useful in describing that? So let's go to the example that you have, and feel free to use a donut as a metaphor.
Well, let's see. Well, you don't see. Here's what's missing. There are no jelly donuts, and I think jelly donuts.
No jelly donuts.
Jelly donuts are a great metaphor because
this is a recurrent problem of ours.
Right. Well, they're a great metaphor because very often what you see on the surface is not the whole story, and you have to kind of bite into it a little bit to get to the delicious filling inside. And sometimes it can be quite a surprise what happens when you bite into a donut.
All right.
So I will go with jelly donut not present in the current situation.
Very good. Okay. Are we to the last slide with the
All
example?
right.
Please,
Okay,
please,
sure.
Please lead us through the example now.
All right, so
that detour was fun.
So this is an example of a curricular complexity map. All right. So the idea is Especially in STEM disciplines, we tend to have very complex curricula. And what we mean by complex is if we think about the structure of a curriculum, in engineering and science and math disciplines, you tend to have long chains of prerequisites. So this class is necessary, the content that you learn in this class is necessary for mastery of the content you're going to learn in the next class, and so on and so forth. And because of that complexity, if a student starts to fall behind, it can have kind of a cascade effect where it can really mess up their time to degree. And in some situations, because some of these topics, especially a little bit later on, they might be a little bit more esoteric, so they don't necessarily, there might be 30 students a year who need to take a class. And so some departments, as a cost-saving measure, will decide, well, we're only going to offer this class in the fall, or we're only going to offer this class in the spring. But if you're taking a class that's a prerequisite for one of those semester-locked classes and you fail it, that's going to put you a year behind. Those are the kinds of barriers that cause especially low-income students to not persist in their progress towards degree, or drive up their debt because they have to stay for an extra amount of time. So addressing these barriers can be kind of difficult if you're not looking at the curriculum as a whole. The faculty own the curriculum in the sense that they're the ones who are determining what is it that's important for people who are entering this field to know. And so when you're asking them to change around the curriculum to make things a little bit easier for students, a lot of times it's not a fair question to ask them without some context, because they understand the benefit of the knowledge that's learned in a given class, right? And very often you're asking someone who might be researching the topic that you're thinking about moving around, hey, do you think that this topic is important for students to learn? And from their perspective, it's like, well, gosh, I don't know. This topic that I've spent a significant portion of my life studying, is it important for people who are entering my field to know? That's not really a fair question, because they understand the benefit, but it's difficult for them to see the cost of having it in a specific place in the curriculum. When you look at a curricular complexity map, it's a little bit easier to see, oh, if this is here, then this becomes a major barrier for students who are trying to get through this curriculum. So now, the reason this is a really good boundary object is because there's some immutable content here that maintains its integrity, right? So this doesn't change depending on who looks at it, but the meaning of it changes depending on who looks at it. So if you're a faculty member who's more interested in the progress of your field, you might look at this horizontally and see, kind of from left to right, here's how the knowledge learned in this class supports the knowledge in the next class, supports the knowledge in the next class. Now, I'm an academic advisor, and very often my priority is looking at students being more successful. I tend to look at it vertically. Oh my gosh, you have to take this class and this class and this class all together at the same time. That is not conducive to success for a given student. So even though it's the same content, we make meaning of it in different ways, but we're able to sit down at a table together and share the meaning, and that is kind of an example of how we can kind of translate. Maybe you hadn't thought about it this way before, and maybe I hadn't thought about it your way before. So for example, I might look at a class as a barrier, right, and see students are not getting through this class. But as a subject matter expert in the faculty, you might understand that this isn't a wall that's just there to block people. This is a load-bearing wall. You need to understand this stuff before you can move on, or you're not going to be successful in anything. Because we can make a curriculum very, very simple by not requiring prerequisites at all. But I don't know how successful you're going to be. I don't know if you want an engineer who's gone through classes willy-nilly in any order they want to be building bridges for you. So some of these structures are really important, but we need to have conversations about which ones are important really, and where do we have points of flexibility to make things a little bit easier for students.
Thank you so much. James, you're great at nice nuggets of wisdom. So some walls are merely barriers, some walls are load-bearing walls. I love that. And earlier we were talking about this curricular complexity and boundary objects, and one thing you have to be careful of is not to make the object the goal. And that was a really nice takeaway too. So, so before we break for questions, can we go back to the donuts? James has kind of started us off with a non-existent jelly donut. David, Jake, you know, you can personify. Which donut person?
Well, to be fair, I'm an expert on donuts. So.
I'm allergic to donuts. I really am.
Really? Okay, well, you should have told me that. We'll just go this way.
Only if he eats it. If it's close, it's okay. Yeah, so we actually have used, James has used the metaphor of donuts when talking to our hub in another instance. So, you know, this idea of bringing together people, right, James talked about a boundary object. Having coffee and donuts is a way to bring people together also. And so we think about partnerships that way too. So just the fact, I actually thought that's what the metaphor is going to be, and it's kind of funny that it's not. So this, you know, doing something that forces people to connect and have conversations, I think is really important when it comes to partnerships. The one thing I want to add to what James was talking about, linking it back to the overall research hub, is we heard a lot of teams talk about some curricular issues. And so what the hub did is, led by James and Amy Richardson and David Reaping and Dustin Grody, was, well, here's a boundary object idea. What if you try using this to build partnerships on your own campus? And so we have 8 teams right now kind of using this approach to try to facilitate conversations across stakeholders within their campus context in very, very different ways. And so we're kind of at the really exciting part now where they've got their data ready, they've been holding meetings with different people, and hopefully that will lead to some new conversations. But to go back to donuts, I think the act of bringing people together is something that a donut can do.
Great, thank you so much. As long as we don't give one to Jake and he has to leave. All right, well, this has been really, really interesting. Thank you for sharing with us the STEM project, and it's started, it's ongoing for several more years, and I think it's a really interesting framework for change. So let's see if there's any questions.
All right, what questions do we have in the room? Thank you so much for sharing. Just out of curiosity, how long is the grant and where are you in that process?
Yeah, we're in year 3 of 5-year grant.
Okay.
Will that be renewed?
It's not renewable. We can do no cost extensions, but.
Okay, so you
or
really...
maybe submit again if they keep the hub. The research hub mechanism for NSF was a new one. We were one of the first ones awarded, one of 6 hubs in the nation.
Okay, so you're also designing for sustainability. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, all right. Well, I used to be a K-12 teacher, and I hate a quiet room, so I had to ask. I guess I am interested in when will your research lead to real changes in curriculum? Like, when will that student who fails that class not have to wait another year before moving forward?
That's a great question. I think James is best. Yeah.
Yeah, I can talk to him. Yeah.
So in this particular case, this particular curricular complexity map was already used to make some changes. So there were some classes that were only offered in the fall semester, and one of the things that they did was, even though they couldn't change necessarily the structure of the curriculum, the prerequisite chains, it was a huge benefit to have this class available in both fall and spring. And that really cut down on some of the barriers that students face. So if they were failing, I think one particular class had, a multivariable calculus. Multivariable calculus, as you might imagine, is problematic for some students. So sometimes they have to take a couple of cracks at it before they get through. But once, if you get an extra semester and that class is waiting for you in a spring semester when normally it wasn't, you're able to kind of move on through. And so sometimes you can find little spots where just this tiny little change that doesn't require that much of an investment in resources or changes makes a very, very big difference. That's a really great aspect of these curricular complexity maps.
This is IC, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is industrial systems engineering. Their four-year graduation rate has increased by about 20% over the past 5 years because of these little tweaks.
This is a little, I think it's adjacent, but the issue of math preparedness specifically, I think we had somewhat encouraging numbers that I saw in an email, but they're oddly encouraging, right? Could you speak a little bit to math preparedness and how that impacts the kinds of student populations that you're really focusing on?
You want to start? And then
Yeah,
I can
I'll
go.
start. So I think obviously math is important for engineering. It is, in terms of the structural curricular complexity language, it is a class with a high blocking value, meaning if you don't pass this, this is a prerequisite, this is the beginning of a long prerequisite chain. So if you're not even able to get into your calculus class from the very beginning, obviously that's going to set you back a little bit. And so for these students, we already know that they're going to be a semester behind just because they have to take a preparation class. But B, we already know that they struggle in math a little bit. So what happens with a lot of these students is, if you think about it in terms of the number of classes that they're taking, the problem doesn't always happen in the fall semester when they're taking the preparation for calculus class. It happens the next semester when they're trying to take calculus 1 and chemistry at the same time, right? And so both of these classes are very work intensive. They are based on your ability to work through closed form problems. So you need to put in enough practice time to be able to pass the tests. They're all, very, they all typically have 3 or 4 tests that are really high stakes, make up, about 80% of the total grade. So if you can't pass these tests, you're not going to be able to get through this particular barrier. And so this conversation came up a few years ago in terms of the change of major requirements for engineering. If you don't know, at Virginia Tech, when students come into the College of Engineering, they come in as general engineering students, which is not a degree granting program. It's a first-year program to prepare students to then explore the 14 different degree programs that we have here, degree granting programs that we have here, to pick the major that is the best choice for them. But in order to be able to declare a major, there are certain classes that they have to tick off. And chemistry used to be one of those classes. So there was kind of this artificial requirement for students to take chemistry, even though it might not necessarily be a prerequisite for a lot of other classes. It was in place because of a policy, and so students were forced to take chemistry and math at the same time, which obviously makes it harder to pass both of them. And so we had some discussions as a task force in the College of Engineering and made the decision to drop chemistry as one of the change of major requirements. Now, it's still in the curriculum for most of the majors, but there's some flexibility in when you have to take it. And so for students who were worried about their performance in math, they were able to kind of move it out of the way. It doesn't directly address the math readiness problem, but it smooths the path a little bit more easily. Now, there's also conversations that are going on with the math department and different approaches that we've been taking. I've taken some boxes of donuts, and they've opened up doors for me that have not been open for me in the past. And that's led to some really productive conversations with the math department, which are going in positive directions at this point.
That's great. I think we're close to time. Are we at time? We're at time. So I just want to thank y'all again, and I want to close also. It sounds like this is a great tool and a great approach for STEM majors, but also for other majors at the university, and also for STEM majors who wish to have more interdisciplinary electives worked into their progress to degree, which I think is another goal that we're all working toward. Okay, thank you very much.